What if the son of the world's most powerful man said he met Jesus, and no one believed him? That was the question plastered across every major headline within hours. CNN. Fox. Twitter. TikTok. You name it. It wasn't some preacher in the Midwest. It wasn't a viral pastor in skinny jeans. It was XAE-A12 Musk, or just X, as the world had come to call him. At 18, he had been largely silent in the public eye. Homeschooled. Private tutors. Flown on jets, raised among robots and rockets. His father, Elon Musk, the most powerful tech tycoon on the planet, had made sure of one thing: privacy at all costs. So when X appeared on a low-key podcast in Los Angeles, The Other Side, hosted by an ex-atheist turned Christian counselor, nobody expected what came next. The clip lasted just 48 seconds. "I saw him," X said plainly. "It wasn't a hallucination. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. I saw Jesus. And he didn't speak with words, but I understood him. Completely. It was the most terrifying and the most peaceful moment of my life." The host blinked, unsure how to respond. "You mean, like a vision?" "No," X replied. "I met him." The internet exploded. Within an hour, the clip hit 1 million views. By morning, every media outlet had a hot take. Was it a joke? A cry for help? Some performance art? Maybe a rogue AI had gone too deep into its own coding. But none of that explained the raw honesty in X's voice. Or the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Or how he smiled, not a forced PR grin, but something more like peace. One thing was certain: this wasn't calculated. It wasn't corporate. It was real. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," the host had said near the end. "This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" And people did. By the thousands. I'm watching from Ohio. And I cried watching this. Never believed in God. But this feels different. Elon's gonna freak. Just wait. And he did. But that came later. It's important to understand something about X. He wasn't just Elon's son. He was born into a world most people couldn't imagine, where your crib is custom-coded, your first words are analyzed by an AI assistant, and your playdates happen in cryogenic labs because your dad's busy trying to colonize Mars. He had never been to public school. Never played Little League. Never stood in a lunch line or waited at the DMV. To the world, he was a myth wrapped in mystery. A walking brainchild of Silicon Valley's most powerful family. But no one asked how he felt about any of it. They didn't see the long nights, scrolling alone. The silence echoing through luxury walls. The way his eyes dimmed after each innovation he was supposed to care about. He wasn't angry. He was empty. Until one night, that emptiness cracked. It started as a dream, or so he thought. A vast desert. Sky burning gold. And in the distance, just a figure. A man in white. Not glowing. Not floating. Just there. Waiting. Watching. When X moved toward him, something strange happened. He didn't feel fear, but something deeper. A pull. A knowing. And though no words were spoken, the message was clear. You're not your father. You're not your machines. I see you. Then X woke up. Drenched in sweat. Shaking. But smiling. That was the first time. Over the following weeks, the dreams continued. Different every time, but always the same figure. Same presence. Each time, a deeper peace. He couldn't explain it. He didn't dare try. His world wasn't built for mystery. It was built on logic, control, proof. But this? This was something else. Something holy. At first, he told no one. He opened the Bible on a cracked iPad. He read the Gospels in secret, tucked inside the folds of a code manual. He searched forums, not religious ones, but real ones, where people talked about God without fluff or filters. And still, the dreams came. Eventually, he couldn't hold it in. So he reached out. An old contact. A guy who ran a podcast for recovering thinkers, the skeptics, the misfits, the ones who'd been burned by religion but still believed in something. They met at a small studio in West Hollywood. No big lights. No entourage. Just X, a camera, and a mic. He didn't prepare anything. He didn't ask for approval. He just spoke. And the world listened. In the days that followed, X's name soared to the top of every trending chart. Half the internet called him a prophet. The other half called him delusional. But no one could look away. Not even his father. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The Musk family wasn't your typical household. When you think of a billionaire's child, you might imagine lavish birthday parties, trips around the world, and the best toys money can buy. But X's childhood was nothing like that. From the moment he was born, his life had been a carefully constructed puzzle. Each piece meticulously designed to ensure that he became something extraordinary, someone extraordinary. And yet, for all the money, for all the resources, for all the power in the world, X had never felt more alone. His first memory was a set of mechanical hands hovering over his cradle, adjusting a holographic display that kept track of his vital signs. His second memory was of his father, Elon Musk, standing in the doorway of his room, deep in thought. Elon didn't smile much, and when he did, it was always followed by a lecture on the importance of thinking outside the box, or the dangers of AI becoming self-aware. "You're destined for greatness, X," Elon had said, once when X was only 5. "The future is yours to shape, if you're smart enough." X had no idea what that meant back then. He was too young to understand the complexities of the digital universe his father had created. But over time, he came to realize that his role in this grand vision wasn't to play, laugh, or dream. It was to succeed. Success was expected. There was no room for failure. Elon Musk, the tech mogul and visionary behind companies like Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, was more a figurehead in X's life than a father. His presence loomed larger than life, both in the family's sprawling mansion and in the world at large. As one of the wealthiest men on the planet, Elon had built his empire on the belief that his mind was invincible. His empire was a reflection of his genius, and he expected his children to reflect that same brilliance. But X was different. X didn't care about rockets or electric cars. He didn't care about Mars. His passion lay elsewhere, in art, in music, in things that didn't align with his father's vision of technological dominance. But it wasn't just a matter of preference. It was something deeper, something intangible. The more time X spent in his father's shadow, the more disconnected he felt from the world. He had no real friends. No one to talk to. The people his father brought around were always either employees or investors, and X never felt comfortable in their company. They were always so polished, so perfect in their projections of success. In his eyes, they were mere reflections of a world that didn't see him. Every day felt like a performance, a choreographed dance of expectations that he wasn't prepared to follow. When X turned 13, Elon gave him a customized AI assistant, a neural interface to help him with homework and school assignments. The AI was built to answer every question, solve every problem, and help him plan out his future in the most efficient way possible. Elon thought it would help his son excel, but to X, it felt like a prison. The AI was always there, always watching, always reminding him that there was no room for mistakes. It was his personal warden, guiding him toward perfection, toward success, toward becoming another extension of his father's empire. Despite the perfect setup, X couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. It wasn't just his father's expectations that weighed him down, it was the weight of a world that looked at him and only saw a part of something greater. People didn't see X, they saw Elon's son. The more he rebelled against the strict expectations placed upon him, the more he felt trapped in what he called his golden cage. It was the perfect metaphor for his life, a gilded, beautiful prison with no escape. Everything was provided for him, luxury, safety, education, but the one thing he couldn't find was freedom. The loneliness that came with this type of existence was suffocating. When he was young, he used to dream about having friends. Real friends. People who didn't care who his father was, people who just wanted to be around him for who he was. But that was impossible. His father's fame and fortune kept them at bay. No one could be trusted. At school, if you could even call it that, X was treated like an alien. His classmates looked at him with awe, as if he were some kind of celebrity, until they realized that he wasn't like the other rich kids. He didn't care about the usual status symbols. He didn't have the flashy cars or the social media following. He didn't even know how to use Instagram. So, he retreated into himself. He spent hours alone, staring at the stars, reading books his father would never approve of, books about philosophy, theology, the nature of the human soul. These were the things that intrigued him. Not rockets. Not cars. Not the future of artificial intelligence. It was in the quiet of these late-night moments, as he scrolled through ancient texts on his phone, that something began to stir inside of him. He didn't know what it was at first, but it felt like a spark, a quiet voice that beckoned him to something greater than himself. And then there were the dreams. X had always been a rational person. Raised to see the world in logical, scientific terms. But these dreams, these bizarre, otherworldly visions, were unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The feeling of being seen, of being understood, was both terrifying and comforting. And for the first time in his life, he felt like maybe there was something more to this world than all the technology his father had built. For X, the dreams weren't just visions. They were messages. The first dream had come when he was 16. He woke up with tears streaming down his face, not because he was scared, but because he felt something he had never felt before, hope. Hope, for a future that wasn't confined by his father's empire. Hope, for a life where he could find his own path. The dreams kept coming. Every night, stronger. More vivid. Until one night, everything changed. The world had always seen X as the perfect son. The one who would follow in his father's footsteps. The heir to Elon Musk's empire. The future of humanity's greatest technological advancements rested in his hands, or so the world thought. But no one knew the truth. No one understood the heavy price of perfection. X had spent most of his life trying to live up to an image that wasn't his own. Every time he stepped into a room, he felt the pressure of expectations, his father's expectations, the public's expectations, society's expectations. Everything about him, from his every move to his every word, had to be a reflection of his father's legacy. He was supposed to be brilliant. He was supposed to inherit the future of SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink, to continue the work his father had started. But the more X tried to fit into that mold, the more suffocating it became. And the further he drifted from who he really was. The first time X realized he wasn't like the other kids at school wasn't because of his wealth or his name, but because of something far more fundamental. It was when he attended a school talent show at the age of 14, where students showcased their skills, magic tricks, stand-up comedy, singing, and dancing. X had been encouraged by his tutors to show off his coding skills, a skill that had been honed since he could walk, but he found himself unwilling to participate. Instead, he spent the night watching the other kids, observing how they felt free to express themselves. Some of them danced with abandon, others sang with passion. They weren't concerned with their grades, or their future. They were simply living. It made X uncomfortable. He didn't know what it felt like to live without the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't know what it felt like to be without the pressure to perform. It wasn't until that night that he realized how much he longed for a life that wasn't so controlled. It wasn't long before X started pulling away. It began with small things, skipping meals with the family, refusing to attend corporate dinners, and spending long hours in his room, reading books about spirituality and philosophy that Elon would never approve of. The more time he spent exploring new ideas and philosophies, the more he realized how different he was from his father. Elon was driven by logic, technology, and the cold pursuit of progress. But X felt something deeper, a yearning for connection, for something more human, more personal. X's growing disillusionment with the tech world only deepened his sense of isolation. He had always been surrounded by the best of the best. Engineers, programmers, scientists, but none of them had ever truly understood him. They admired him because he was Elon Musk's son, but they didn't see him. They didn't see X. And that loneliness was unbearable. As X drifted further from his father's world, the tension between them began to grow. Elon noticed his son's increasing distance, but instead of offering support or understanding, he doubled down on his expectations. "You're wasting your potential," Elon told him one evening after a tense dinner. "You're not here to be some artist or philosopher. You're here to build. To shape the future." X felt his heart sink as he heard those words again. To build. To shape. Was that really all he was? Was that all he would ever be? He looked across the table at his father, his face illuminated by the glow of a nearby tablet, his mind already racing toward the next big project. Mars, Neuralink, the boring company. The future was endless for Elon. But for X, it felt like a trap. "I don't want to build rockets, Dad," X finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to do this anymore." Elon didn't react immediately. His eyes scanned the screen in front of him, and for a brief moment, X thought his father hadn't heard him. But then Elon's gaze lifted, piercing X with a look that was both calculating and cold. "You don't have a choice," Elon replied, his voice flat. "This is your destiny. You can't run from it." X didn't say anything after that. He couldn't. How could he explain what he was feeling? How could he make his father understand that it wasn't the future of humanity that he cared about, it was his own future? The rest of the night passed in silence, but the words lingered in X's mind long after. "You don't have a choice." It was the same thing his father had always said, every time X tried to assert his own identity. "You're not allowed to choose, X. You don't get to decide who you are." By the time X was 17, he felt like a stranger in his own life. Everything that had been built around him, the mansion, the tutors, the endless possibilities, felt hollow. The more he tried to escape the life his father had mapped out for him, the more entangled he became in it. But it was during one of these dark moments of confusion that something extraordinary happened. X found himself walking down a quiet, tree-lined street in Los Angeles, just a few blocks from his family's compound. He had no particular destination, just a restless need to be alone. He was deep in thought, questioning everything about his life when something caught his eye, a small church nestled between two modern skyscrapers. It was the kind of place he would have never noticed before, hidden among the shiny glass buildings and the flashing lights of the city. But there was something about it that drew him in. Without thinking, X entered the church. Inside, it was peaceful. The soft hum of silence enveloped him, and the dim light streaming through the stained glass windows made the room feel sacred, almost holy. He sat down in a pew, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had brought him here. He didn't know why, but something about the stillness calmed him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about rockets or Tesla, or the pressure of his father's empire. He was simply there. Present. In the moment. That moment marked the beginning of X's transformation. He had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. And in that quiet church, X knew one thing for sure: he was no longer going to follow a path that wasn't his. It had been weeks since X first stepped into that small, quiet church. The feeling of peace lingered long after he left that day, as though something had been awakened inside him. The overwhelming pressure that had been weighing on him for years suddenly felt distant, like a shadow that he could no longer reach. For the first time in his life, X felt as though he had found something real. Something that had nothing to do with his father's empire, nothing to do with the future of technology or innovation. It was a feeling, a truth that had been buried beneath layers of expectation and societal noise. It was the search for meaning. The search for purpose that transcended his father's ambitions. The weeks that followed were marked by a quiet rebellion, though not in the sense most people would expect from the son of Elon Musk. He didn't lash out. He didn't tear down the walls that surrounded him. Instead, he began to withdraw more and more, pulling away from the constant buzz of his family's world. At night, he would read. He devoured books on philosophy, theology, and the human condition, books that had once seemed irrelevant to him but now felt like the very key to understanding the world. He read about the suffering that everyone faced and the hope that people clung to. He read about those who had questioned the very purpose of their lives and found something deeper, something greater than success or achievement. X began to understand that his father's relentless drive for perfection had come at a cost. Elon had built a life based on intellect and logic, but X had always felt that something was missing. He had never understood the heart of the matter. The very soul of the people he was trying to help, the very spirit that made life worth living. Now, sitting in the quiet of his room at night, X found himself longing for something more than innovation. He wanted connection. He wanted truth. One evening, as he sat in his room under the dim glow of his desk lamp, X came across a passage in one of his books that shook him to his core. It was a simple passage, but the words cut through the noise in his mind like a blade. "The truth will set you free." X sat there, stunned. He had heard that phrase countless times in his life, but this time, it felt different. It felt like a revelation. It was in that moment that everything clicked. He wasn't just looking for a different path to walk, he was looking for something true. Something real. The truth had always been there, buried beneath his father's empire, beneath the legacy that had been laid out before him. But now, for the first time, he felt ready to search for it, on his own terms. He knew the journey would not be easy. He knew it would be filled with obstacles, starting with the most significant one of all, his father. X didn't tell Elon about his newfound beliefs right away. He knew that his father would dismiss it all as naive idealism. Elon had always believed in the power of science and technology, but not in anything that couldn't be measured or quantified. His father had always seen the world in terms of problems to be solved, not mysteries to be explored. X had learned that lesson the hard way over the years. He had learned that, to Elon, emotions were secondary, even irrelevant, to the grand vision of the future. But that wasn't enough for X anymore. The future, as his father envisioned it, wasn't just about building better rockets or artificial intelligence. It was about something deeper, the human spirit. But how could he explain that to his father? How could he articulate something so intangible, something that seemed so distant from the world Elon had built? How could he explain that he was no longer interested in living for the future, he was interested in living for the present, for the now, and for the truth that existed beyond the world of tech? For days, X wrestled with this question. And then, one evening, while they were having dinner, the opportunity presented itself. It was just the two of them in the sleek, modern dining room, a rare moment of quiet between father and son. The lights were dim, the air thick with tension. Elon sat across from him, his usual look of quiet intensity on his face, his mind already drifting toward the next big project, the next challenge. "So, X," Elon said casually, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about your future. We've been talking about your role at SpaceX, but I'm starting to think you might be more interested in something else." "Neuralink, perhaps. You could help us design the next phase of the human-machine interface. It's a perfect fit for you. X paused, his fork hovering in midair. It was the same conversation he had heard 1,000 times before, the same pressure to follow the same path. But this time, something inside him snapped. I don't want to work at SpaceX, X said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to build rockets. I don't want to be a part of any of it anymore. I want to find something real. Something meaningful. Elon didn't respond immediately. His eyes narrowed, as though he was trying to process the words X had just said. He put his fork down slowly and leaned back in his chair. Meaningful? Elon asked, his tone more curious than angry. What does that even mean? X looked at his father, feeling the weight of his words. For the first time, he wasn't trying to please him. He wasn't trying to be the son Elon wanted him to be. I don't know yet, X admitted. But I do know that I can't spend my whole life building something I don't believe in. I can't live in a world that only values logic and machines. I need something more. Something real. Elon's expression hardened, but X could see a flicker of something in his eyes, a mix of confusion and frustration. It wasn't anger, though. For the first time, X saw the uncertainty in his father's gaze. I see, Elon said quietly. Well, I can't stop you from making your own choices. But you'll never know what the world can be if you don't push the limits of what's possible. X nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. I'm not running away, Dad. I just want to live a life that matters. In a way that's true to who I am. As the dinner ended in silence, X knew that his relationship with his father had changed forever. But more than that, he knew that his journey was only just beginning. And this time, it wasn't about rockets, or AI, or technology. This time, it was about finding the truth that would set him free. The next few days after dinner were the hardest X had ever faced. His father had barely spoken to him. The silence between them was more suffocating than any argument could have been. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield, each step a quiet acknowledgement of the rift that was now wide and irreparable between them. X had expected anger, but it wasn't anger that he was met with. It was disappointment. Elon had always been a man of action, quick decisions, sharp intellect, clear goals. He had never been one to waste time with emotions. But the look in his eyes when X had spoken those words, I want something real, had been unlike anything X had ever seen. Elon wasn't just disappointed in the choice X was making, he was confused. And that was worse. Are you really willing to throw all of this away? Elon had asked him a few days after their dinner conversation. They were in the garden behind the mansion, the bright California sun shining down on them, but the warmth of the day didn't reach the air between them. I'm not throwing anything away, X replied, his voice calm but firm. I'm choosing something else. Something that feels like me. Elon's brow furrowed, his lips tight. You're my son. You have everything you could ever need right in front of you. You have the opportunity to change the world, X. Why would you walk away from that? X had been asked that question 1,000 times. By tutors, by mentors, by publicists and business leaders, and now, his father. The answer had never been more clear than it was right then. I can't change the world if I'm not part of it, X said quietly. I can't live in a world that only sees me as a tool for progress. I want to find something that connects me to something bigger than all of this. For a moment, there was a heavy silence. Elon didn't respond. He didn't have to. The look on his face told X everything he needed to know. His father couldn't understand what he was saying, couldn't grasp the desire that burned inside of him. And X knew he was at a crossroads. It wasn't just about his relationship with Elon anymore. It was about himself. His truth. X had made his decision, but making it was only the first step. The real challenge was what would come next. He no longer wanted to be the obedient son, the shadow of his father's greatness. But stepping out from under that shadow meant walking into the unknown. He spent the next few weeks in quiet reflection, trying to figure out where this new path would lead. He had thought about traveling, about stepping away from everything for a while, to clear his head and discover who he was without the weight of his last name on his shoulders. But then, one morning, a letter arrived, an invitation to speak at a small spiritual retreat in the hills of Northern California. The letter had come from an old friend of Elon's, someone X had met a few years back at a charity event. This man, Thomas, was a former tech mogul who had walked away from his own fortune to pursue a life of spiritual growth and mindfulness. The invitation was simple. We would be honored to have you join us for a weekend of reflection and dialogue on the meaning of life, technology, and our place in the universe. No obligations. Just a chance to explore. X read the letter several times, the words resonating deep within him. It felt like a sign. This was the perfect opportunity to step away, to find the answers he had been searching for. To speak with someone who understood the tension between the world of technology and the world of the spirit. He knew that this could be the beginning of something life-changing. X's decision to attend the retreat was met with mixed reactions. His father's silence continued, but there was a sense of understanding in the air. Elon didn't approve, but he didn't protest either. In a way, X's choice had forced him to face a truth he had been avoiding for years, that his son wasn't just going to inherit his empire. X was going to forge his own destiny. It was a hard truth for Elon to swallow. He had always prided himself on building something that would last, something that would change humanity's future. And now, it seemed that X was walking away from it all. But X didn't feel like he was walking away. He felt like he was walking towards something more important. He had made a choice that wasn't easy, but it was his. The retreat was a small, intimate gathering, nestled in the hills outside of San Francisco. It was far removed from the tech world X had grown up in, no flashy presentations, no billion-dollar deals, no cutting-edge gadgets. The people there were different. They weren't concerned with impressing anyone. They were concerned with understanding themselves, with finding deeper meaning in their lives. X found himself sitting in a circle with a group of strangers, most of whom were older than him, with lives that had been shaped by experiences he could hardly relate to. Yet, as the conversation began, something in X shifted. These people weren't just interested in solving problems or pushing boundaries, they were interested in living authentically, in understanding their purpose on this earth. The group spent their days meditating, discussing philosophy, and reflecting on the nature of existence. They talked about the intersection of technology and spirituality, about how the two could coexist without one overpowering the other. For the first time in his life, X felt like he was part of something that mattered, not because it would change the world, but because it was helping him find his place in the world. As the retreat came to a close, X felt a renewed sense of clarity. He had made the right choice. The world he had once known, the world of wealth, power, and technology, was not where his true path lay. He didn't know exactly where his journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He had chosen to follow his heart, to seek truth beyond the borders of what had been laid out for him. And in that moment, X knew that no matter what happened next, he had taken the first step toward discovering who he was truly meant to be. X stepped out of the retreat center early in the morning, the fog of Northern California still thick in the air. The retreat had ended the night before, and though he felt a deep sense of peace from the time spent in reflection, there was an underlying current of uncertainty pulling at him. What now? Where did he go from here? He walked down the winding dirt path that led to the main road, the cool morning air filling his lungs. He had learned so much during the past few days, about the balance between technology and spirituality, about the importance of living authentically. But there was still something nagging at him. Something missing. As he rounded a bend in the path, he noticed a figure sitting alone on a bench overlooking a wide expanse of forest. The person, a man in his mid-30s, was casually dressed, his eyes closed, hands resting on his knees in a meditative posture. There was something serene about him, something that immediately drew X's attention. X wasn't sure why, but something inside him urged him to approach. "Mind if I sit?" X asked, his voice breaking the silence. The man opened his eyes and gave X a soft smile. "Not at all," he replied, shifting slightly to make room. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it?" X nodded, sitting down beside him. For a few moments, they both sat in silence, watching the mist rise from the valley below. It was one of those rare moments in life when the world seemed to hold its breath. "I don't think I've seen you around here before," the man said, glancing over at X. "Did you just arrive?" X shook his head. "I've been here for a few days. Just finished the retreat." The man raised an eyebrow. "The retreat on mindfulness and spiritual reflection? I've heard good things." "Yeah," X said. "It was eye-opening. But I'm still trying to figure out what comes next." The man turned his head fully toward X, studying him for a moment. "I know that feeling. It's one of the hardest moments of your life, the moment you realize that everything you thought you were supposed to do isn't what you want anymore. That you have to choose your own path, and it's scary." X was surprised at how directly the man had spoken. He had expected a simple pleasantry or a vague, comforting answer. But this man seemed to understand. "I'm X," he said, holding out his hand. "Adam," the man replied, shaking his hand firmly. "And I've been where you are. You're trying to figure out who you are outside of the expectations everyone has for you." X's eyes widened slightly. "You could say that." Adam smiled knowingly. "It's not easy. I know. I left my career in the tech world years ago. I was working at a big firm, chasing the same things everyone else was chasing: success, money, recognition. But then I realized it wasn't fulfilling me. It wasn't who I was meant to be." X felt a flicker of recognition. This man, Adam, had walked away from a life that was almost identical to the one X had been living for years. But instead of feeling isolated by Adam's story, X felt something else: connection. Here was someone who understood. "What did you do?" X asked, genuinely curious. "I walked away," Adam said simply. "I traveled, I meditated, I read, I searched. And in that search, I found something deeper than any job or title could offer. I found a sense of peace. I found clarity." X looked out at the fog still creeping through the trees. "I don't know if I can walk away from everything. My father's empire, my responsibilities. It feels like there's so much pressure to keep pushing forward, to follow the path that's already been laid out for me." Adam nodded slowly. "That's the hardest part. The pressure to keep going, to keep achieving, to keep building. But sometimes, you have to step away to see the bigger picture. It's not about what you accomplish. It's about who you are in the process." X turned to look at him, his mind racing. "But what if who I am isn't enough? What if I'm just lost?" "Everyone feels lost at some point," Adam said softly. "It's part of the journey. The trick is to embrace it, rather than run from it. The uncertainty is where the magic happens. It's where the answers start to reveal themselves." X felt a lump form in his throat. He had always been the son of Elon Musk. The heir to a legacy of technological advancements, world-changing ideas, and revolutionary companies. But sitting here with Adam, he began to realize that perhaps the life he was meant to lead wasn't about being a part of that empire. Perhaps it was about finding his own truth. For the first time, X felt the weight of his father's expectations lifting, just a little. It was as if a veil had been pulled back, and he was seeing the world, and himself, in a completely new way. "I'm afraid," X admitted quietly. "Afraid of failing, of letting people down, of being invisible." Adam turned to face him fully, his expression kind. "Fear is natural. But you know what? You're already not invisible. Just by having the courage to ask the right questions, to seek something real, you're already standing out. The world doesn't need another Elon Musk. It needs you, whoever you're meant to be. X was silent for a long moment, letting Adam's words sink in. The truth of them, the simplicity of them, felt like a breath of fresh air. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also liberating. Finally, X spoke. I don't know what my next step is, but I know I can't keep living in the shadows. Adam smiled. Then you've already made the first choice. The rest will come in time. Just keep walking the path, even when it feels unclear. X nodded slowly, a sense of calm washing over him. It wasn't a concrete plan, but it was enough for now. The journey had begun, and that was all that mattered. As X stood up to leave, Adam stood with him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Good luck, X, Adam said, his voice filled with warmth. And remember, the only person you need to prove anything to is yourself. X walked away from the bench with a renewed sense of purpose, a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like he was walking in the right direction, his direction. As the fog lifted and the sun broke through the trees, X knew that the real journey was just beginning. The world was waiting, but it wasn't the world of tech and fortune. It was a world where he could finally begin to discover who he truly was, beyond the legacy. X sat in his car, parked outside the sprawling mansion where he had spent most of his life. The same mansion where he had learned the rules of success, the art of business, and the weight of living up to an impossible standard. The place that had always felt like home, until it didn't. Today was the day. The day he would have to face his father and tell him the truth. He had hoped to delay the confrontation, to find a way to ease into the inevitable discussion. But the longer he waited, the harder it became. The silence between them had become a suffocating force. It was time for him to break it. X ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He could already hear Elon's voice in his head, demanding explanations, questioning his choices. Elon Musk was not a man who took defiance lightly. For years, X had been his proud heir, groomed to continue the legacy of his father's empire. But now, X felt the weight of those expectations like an anchor, dragging him down into a future he didn't want. It wasn't just the tech world that X had grown disillusioned with. It was the pressure to be something he wasn't. The constant comparisons to his father. The feeling that he was nothing more than a cog in a machine. And most of all, the suffocating weight of living a life scripted for him, with no room for his own desires, his own dreams. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the car, his feet carrying him toward the door. He rang the bell and waited, the sound of his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Elon opened the door himself. His expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of something, concern. Curiosity? X couldn't tell. His father had always been a man of few words when it came to emotions. But the way Elon's gaze lingered on him for a moment told X that he wasn't just angry. There was more to it. X, Elon said, stepping aside to let him in. You're here. I didn't expect you to come back so soon. X nodded but didn't speak immediately. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. They sat down in the grand living room, the space filled with high ceilings and expensive furniture. It had always felt sterile to X, beautiful, yes, but devoid of any real warmth or life. It was a showpiece, a symbol of success. But in this moment, it felt cold, almost suffocating. So, what's this all about? Elon asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, controlled. He wasn't angry, not yet, but there was a quiet intensity in his words. X took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when his decision would finally be laid bare. The moment when he would have to face the reality of choosing a life that was not part of the world his father had built. I've been thinking a lot, X began, his voice steady but his heart pounding in his chest. And I've realized that I can't do this anymore. I can't live in the shadow of your expectations. I can't keep pretending that this life is the one I want. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening. What do you mean by that? I mean, X continued, I'm not going to follow in your footsteps. I don't want to run your companies, and I don't want to continue your work. I've spent years trying to figure out who I am, and I've come to the conclusion that I need to walk a different path. One that's mine. For a moment, there was complete silence. Elon's expression was unreadable, his eyes locked onto X as though trying to process what he had just heard. The room seemed to grow smaller, the weight of the moment crushing down on them both. You're making a mistake, Elon said, his voice cold but not angry. You think that walking away from all of this will somehow make you happy? That you'll find some deeper meaning out there? Let me tell you something, X. The world doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about results. It cares about people who can make things happen. If you want to succeed, if you want to matter, you'll have to do the work. X's hands clenched into fists in his lap, but he kept his voice calm. I don't want to succeed on your terms anymore. I don't want to be your successor. I want to find my own purpose. Elon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think it's that easy? You think you can just throw all of this away? You don't have the luxury to be so naive, X. I built this empire. I've changed the world. And I'm not going to sit here and watch you throw it all away because you've decided that you want to be some kind of spiritual traveler. X's heart hammered in his chest, but his words came out steady. I don't want to change the world in the way you think I should. I want to make a difference by being true to myself. I can't do that here. Not in this life. Not as your heir. Elon turned to face him, his eyes flashing with something that might have been anger, but there was also something else, hurt. X had never seen that before. It was as if his father didn't just disagree with his decision. It was as if he couldn't fathom that his son, the person he had molded, could ever want something different. I don't understand you, Elon said quietly, his voice almost broken. I've given you everything. And this is how you repay me. X stood up, his own frustration bubbling to the surface. I'm not repaying you. I'm living for myself. I'm not a pawn in your game anymore, Dad. I'm not your backup plan. I'm your son, and that means I get to choose who I want to be. I get to choose what my future looks like. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was more profound than anything they had said. It was the silence of a father realizing that his son would not walk the path he had laid out for him. And it was the silence of a son finally understanding that the only way to move forward was to let go of the past. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice soft but filled with finality. I don't know if I can accept this. But I guess you've already made your choice. I have, X replied. And I have to live with it. With those words, X turned and walked toward the door. His heart ached, but there was a sense of clarity, too. This was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was also the most freeing. As he stepped out into the cool air, X knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in his life, it felt like he was choosing it. X walked down the winding path away from his father's mansion, each step carrying the weight of the words they had just exchanged. The cold air felt oddly refreshing as it cut through the tension that had hung in the room. He had just made the hardest decision of his life, and it felt both liberating and terrifying. He had never thought it would come to this, the moment when he would walk away from the life that had been mapped out for him since birth. He didn't look back. He couldn't. For the first time in years, X felt a sense of freedom. The world was wide open before him, not bound by the expectations of his father or the weight of the empire that had always seemed to define his existence. But as he walked away, he also realized that freedom came with a price. There was no clear path in front of him anymore, no roadmap, no safety net. He was on his own, and that was both exhilarating and terrifying. X didn't know where to go, but he knew he had to start somewhere. He needed a place to ground himself, to figure out what it meant to live for himself, not for someone else. His mind kept returning to the conversation he had had with Adam during the retreat, the words that had resonated deeply with him: the uncertainty is where the magic happens. X couldn't have agreed more. But now that he was standing on the edge of that uncertainty, he couldn't help but wonder if he was brave enough to face it. He made his way to a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place he had passed many times but never had the time to visit. He needed a quiet space to think, to process the whirlwind of emotions that were swirling inside him. As he entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries greeted him, and he couldn't help but let out a quiet sigh of relief. It felt like a small oasis in a world that had just turned upside down. The cafe was cozy, filled with people chatting quietly and the soft clink of cups and saucers. X took a seat at a table by the window and ordered a coffee. As he sat there, staring out at the street, he couldn't help but feel like he was in between two worlds, his past and his future. The life he had left behind was so deeply ingrained in him, and yet, it no longer felt like his. And the future? It was still a blur, a path that he had yet to carve out for himself. His thoughts were interrupted when a voice broke through the quiet hum of the cafe. "Is this seat taken?" X looked up to see a young woman standing at his table, holding a cup of coffee in her hand. She had a warm, friendly smile that immediately put him at ease. There was something about her presence that felt welcoming, something that made X feel like he wasn't as alone in the world as he had thought. "No, it's free," X said, offering a half-smile. "Please, take a seat." She slid into the chair across from him and set her cup down. "Thanks," she said, settling in. "I always love finding a quiet spot like this. Feels like the perfect place to just breathe for a minute." X nodded. "I know what you mean. I've been feeling like I need to take a breath lately." She looked at him with a curious expression. "What's been going on?" X hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to share anything with a complete stranger. But something about her openness made him feel like he could talk, like maybe she wouldn't judge him for what he was about to say. "I just walked away from my entire life," X admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father's world, his business. I'm trying to figure out who I am without all of that." The woman's eyebrows raised slightly, but her expression softened. "That sounds intense. I can't even imagine." X looked down at his coffee, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "It is. But I don't know if I can keep living someone else's dream. I've spent so much of my life trying to live up to someone else's expectations that I don't even know what I want anymore. I feel lost." She took a sip of her coffee, then set the cup down gently. "I think it's normal to feel lost when you're starting something new. It's scary to step into the unknown, but I think it's also the only way to truly find yourself. You know." X met her eyes, surprised at how much her words resonated with him. "You sound like you know what you're talking about." She smiled, a little sheepish. "Maybe I do. I've had my own journey of figuring out what I want, and it wasn't easy. I've worked in the corporate world, done the whole, climb the ladder thing, but eventually, I realized I wasn't living for myself. I was living for the approval of others. And that wasn't enough." X couldn't help but feel a connection with her. Her honesty, her vulnerability, she had clearly been through her own struggles, and somehow, that made him feel less alone in his own. "So, what did you do?" X asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged. "I quit. Left everything behind and started my own business. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of people who told me I was crazy. But in the end, I found something that felt right for me. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And that makes all the difference." X stared at her, processing what she had just said. The idea of stepping away from everything he had known, like she had, was both terrifying and inspiring. But maybe it was the step he needed to take. Maybe this was how he would find the clarity he was searching for. I don't know if I have the courage to do that, X admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. She smiled kindly. The courage comes after you make the decision. It's not about having the courage to take the leap. It's about taking the leap and letting the courage find you. X sat back in his chair, letting her words settle in. For the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe he wasn't completely lost. Maybe he was just starting a new chapter, a chapter that would be his own. I think I might just need to take that leap, X said, a slow smile forming on his face. She grinned. I think you do. X left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. His conversation with the woman had opened his eyes in a way he hadn't expected. He realized that stepping away from the empire wasn't a rejection of everything his father had built, it was a rejection of the idea that he had to live someone else's dream. As he walked down the street, he felt the weight of his decision, but for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. The future was still uncertain, but it was his future to create. And for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. X spent the following weeks in a haze of decisions. Everything felt unfamiliar, the world outside the insulated life he had grown up in suddenly seemed both vast and intimidating. He didn't have a specific plan. There was no blueprint to follow. His days no longer had the structure of board meetings, corporate goals, or expected results. There was only the uncertainty, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like possibility. He had always thought that the key to success was having everything mapped out, every detail planned, every move calculated. But now, as he stood on the precipice of something entirely new, he realized that maybe the key was not knowing where the road would lead, but simply having the courage to step forward. He spent hours walking around the city, feeling the pulse of life around him. He'd always been surrounded by the hum of technology, innovation, and corporate power. But now, as he wandered through crowded streets and quiet parks, he found himself more attuned to the simple things. The sound of children playing, the chatter of strangers, the smell of fresh flowers blooming in the spring air. It was a far cry from the high-tech labs and sleek boardrooms he had grown accustomed to. On one of his walks, X found himself drawn to an old, quaint bookstore tucked away on a side street. It was the kind of place that didn't scream success or ambition, it didn't need to. The handwritten sign above the door read, "The journey awaits." Something about it felt welcoming, like it was a sanctuary for those who were looking for more than just the next big thing. X pushed open the door and was greeted by the musty, comforting scent of old paper and leather-bound books. The soft sound of a bell chimed above the door as he stepped inside, and a small, older man behind the counter looked up with a smile. "Can I help you find something?" the man asked, his voice warm and gentle. X glanced around, unsure of what he was looking for. Books on self-help. Maybe a guide on how to reinvent his life. But something inside told him that wasn't what he needed. "I'm not really sure," X said. "Maybe just a book about finding your way." The man's eyes twinkled. "I have just the thing." He disappeared behind a row of bookshelves and emerged with a small, unassuming book. The cover was simple, the title written in faded gold letters, "The Path Less Traveled." The man handed it to X with a knowing smile. "I think you'll find what you need in here," he said. X took the book with a nod, intrigued by the man's certainty. He paid for it and left the bookstore, feeling like he had just stumbled onto something important. The title resonated with him, the idea of a path less traveled, of stepping away from the familiar and venturing into the unknown. It felt like a metaphor for everything he had just chosen to do. Back at his apartment, X sat down and began reading the book. It wasn't filled with the typical advice he was used to hearing. There were no step-by-step guides or success formulas. Instead, the book told stories of people who had taken risks, who had embraced uncertainty, and who had found meaning in unexpected places. The underlying message was simple: life didn't always have to make sense. Sometimes, the most fulfilling journeys were the ones that began with a leap of faith, with no clear destination in mind. As he read, X realized how much he had been missing. For years, he had been so focused on building something tangible. Something that could be measured and defined. But he had never stopped to ask himself what he truly wanted. He had been so busy chasing success that he hadn't even given himself the chance to understand what success really meant to him. The more he read, the more he felt the weight of his past decisions lifting. There were no clear answers, but there was a sense of peace in the uncertainty. X had spent too long trying to control his life, trying to fit it into a neat, predictable box. But now, for the first time, he was willing to accept that life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes, that was exactly what made it worth living. The next day, X made a decision. He wouldn't spend any more time trying to plan out his future. He wasn't going to follow in his father's footsteps, and he wasn't going to conform to the expectations others had placed on him. He would follow his heart, and in doing so, maybe he'd finally find what he was meant to do. But first, he had to take the first step. He started by visiting an old friend, Rachel. She was someone he had known for years but had lost touch with amid the pressures of his former life. Rachel was different. She wasn't part of the business world, and she didn't care about his family's wealth or power. She was grounded, creative, and had always followed her own path, regardless of what anyone thought. "Hey, Rachel," X greeted her as he knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" She opened the door, surprise flickering in her eyes before a warm smile replaced it. "X. It's been forever. Come on in." As they sat down, X didn't waste any time. "I need your help," he admitted. "I'm trying to figure out where I'm going in life, and I don't have any answers. But I do know one thing, I don't want to keep doing what I was doing. I need to start fresh." Rachel leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "That sounds like a big change. What are you thinking of doing?" X shrugged, unsure of the specifics but feeling a sense of excitement bubbling inside him. "I'm not sure. I want to explore, try new things, maybe even work on something creative. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think it's time to stop playing it safe." Rachel smiled knowingly. "I think that's exactly what you need. You're always going to be stuck if you don't take risks and step out of your comfort zone." X felt a rush of gratitude. It was exactly what he needed to hear. "Thanks, Rachel. I think I needed someone to tell me that." As he left her apartment later that day, X felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Maybe the road ahead was unclear, but it was his to choose. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace the unknown. He wasn't sure where this new journey would lead, but one thing was for certain, it was his journey to make. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed X's conversation with Rachel were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. He had made a decision, he was going to start over. But as he took the first steps toward this new life, he quickly realized that starting over wasn't as simple as just saying the words. It was a process, and it was going to take time. One of the first things X did was take a break from the familiar places, the high-end restaurants, the private clubs, and the luxurious corners of the city where he had always felt at home. He needed a new environment, one that would push him out of his comfort zone and force him to confront the uncertainty of his situation. He rented a small, modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far away from the hustle and bustle of his previous life. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't have the panoramic views of the city or the sprawling space he was used to. But there was something about it that felt real, something that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't a mansion, but it was his. The first few nights in the apartment were unsettling. The silence was different from the constant hum of his old life. There were no staff members knocking on his door, no meetings to attend, and no constant demands for his attention. It was just him and the emptiness of a new beginning. At first, he didn't know what to do with himself. He didn't have any projects lined up, no big meetings to prepare for, and no clear direction. It was both liberating and disorienting. He spent hours in the apartment, staring out of the window, watching the world go by, wondering what came next. But over time, the silence started to feel less oppressive and more peaceful. He began to embrace it, using the time to think, to reflect, and to process the massive changes in his life. X also spent time revisiting some of the things he had put on hold for years, things that had once brought him joy but that had been pushed aside in the pursuit of success. He started reading more, picking up books he'd always meant to get to but never had the time for. He revisited his old love for painting, picking up a brush for the first time in years, experimenting with colors and shapes on canvas. And he began walking through the city every day, allowing himself to get lost in the streets, taking in the energy of the people around him, and observing life in a way he never had before. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One morning, as X sat in his apartment, drinking coffee and gazing out at the city, his phone buzzed. He had been avoiding most of his old contacts, but this message was from someone he hadn't expected to hear from, his father. "We need to talk. Let me know when you're available." X stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a wave of emotions flood over him. The last time they spoke had been a confrontation, one that had ended with X walking away from everything his father had built. Now, his father was reaching out. He didn't know what to expect from this conversation. Was it an apology? A demand for him to come back to the fold? Or was it something else altogether? X had spent so much time avoiding his father's influence, but now it seemed inevitable. His past was calling him back. X took a deep breath and replied, "I'm free tomorrow afternoon. Let's meet." The next day, he found himself sitting across from his father in a quiet, upscale cafe. The contrast between this meeting and the last one couldn't have been more stark. No shouting, no accusations, just the two of them sitting in an uncomfortable silence, each unsure of what to say. Finally, his father broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice more measured than usual. "About how you wanted to find your own path. I didn't understand it at the time, but I think I get it now." X raised an eyebrow. "You do?" His father nodded. "I've spent my entire life building this empire, trying to create something that would outlast me. But I've realized that I've been so focused on the future that I've neglected the present. I didn't consider how it might affect you, how it might affect your own future." X was stunned. For years, his father had been a constant force in his life, imposing his vision, dictating the path X should take. To hear him speak like this, so vulnerably, was unexpected. "I don't know what your future holds," his father continued, "but I want you to know that whatever you decide, I won't stand in your way. You have my blessing to figure it out." X's heart began to race. This wasn't what he had expected at all. He had prepared for a confrontation, for a demand that he return to the family business. But instead, he was hearing words he never thought would come from his father. "I appreciate that," X said quietly, trying to process the weight of the moment. "I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I need to figure it out on my own." His father gave a small nod, looking at him with something close to pride in his eyes. "I know you'll figure it out. Just don't forget where you came from, X." X wasn't sure if he had ever heard those words from his father in such a way before. There was no judgment, no pressure. Just acceptance. As he left the cafe, X felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The conversation with his father had opened a door that he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through, but it also reminded him of the most important lesson he had learned over the past few weeks: starting over wasn't about rejecting the past. It was about using it as a foundation, not as a cage. He had spent so much of his life trying to escape his father's shadow. But now, he was realizing that he didn't have to tear everything down. He could build something new, something that was his own, using the lessons from his past and the strength he had gained from walking away. As he walked back to his apartment, X felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was ready to embrace it. The days after his meeting with his father felt like a turning point for X. The conversation had given him clarity, but more importantly, it had instilled a sense of permission to build something for himself, not for anyone else. It was a reminder that success wasn't about impressing the world around him or living up to an image. It was about creating something that resonated with him on a deeper level. With this newfound resolve, X began taking concrete steps toward his future. The first of those steps was finding something to do, anything that would help him channel his energy into something meaningful. He had been avoiding his old connections, deliberately distancing himself from the world he had known, but now it was time to engage again, but on his terms. He reached out to a few former colleagues, people who had always impressed him but who didn't fit the stereotypical corporate mold. He had grown tired of the business-as-usual approach, and now he sought individuals who had something unique to offer. One of them was Daniel, an old friend who had left the corporate world years ago to pursue a career in sustainable technologies. Daniel had always been a visionary, but his ideas had never quite fit into the traditional business world. X had admired his passion and his commitment to making a difference, even when it wasn't the easy path. "Daniel, I've been thinking a lot," X said when they met for coffee one afternoon. "About starting something new. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I need a change. I want to create something that matters, something that's not about profits or status." Daniel's eyes lit up as he leaned forward. "You're finally ready to break free of the old game, huh?" X nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I think so. But I don't know where to start. I have ideas, but I need someone to help guide me through the chaos." Daniel chuckled. "Well, chaos is where innovation happens. I've got a project I'm working on. It's in its infancy, but it could be the kind of thing you'd want to be a part of. It's focused on renewable energy and social impact, and it's not going to be easy. But it might be the kind of challenge you need." X felt a spark of interest. The idea of working on something that aligned with his values, something that wasn't driven solely by profit, was exactly the kind of project he had been searching for. He had spent so much of his life chasing the wrong kind of success, but this felt different. It felt like the kind of challenge that would force him to grow and evolve. "I'm in," X said, surprising even himself. "What do we need to get started?" Daniel grinned. "Well, first we need to build a team. But more than that, we need to make sure we're ready to go all in. This won't be easy, but if we do it right, it could change everything." The first step was small but crucial. X and Daniel spent the next few weeks gathering information, researching the industry, and brainstorming ideas. They connected with like-minded individuals who were interested in making a real impact, not just turning a profit. They found people who shared their vision, individuals who were committed to creating a more sustainable and just future. But even as they made progress, X couldn't ignore the doubts that crept into his mind. Building something from the ground up was not easy. There were countless challenges: funding, logistics, finding the right people, and, perhaps most of all, convincing others that this was worth their time. They weren't just competing against other businesses. They were competing against a system that prioritized short-term gains over long-term impact. One evening, X found himself alone in his apartment, sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers, notes, and plans. His mind was buzzing with ideas, but also filled with uncertainty. What if this didn't work? What if it was all a waste of time? He had walked away from everything that was familiar, from the safety of his family's fortune, and now he was betting on something uncertain. But then he thought back to the lessons he had learned over the past few months, the importance of starting over, of being willing to take risks and embrace the unknown. This was the process of building something meaningful. It wasn't going to happen overnight, and it wouldn't come without its struggles. But if he truly believed in what he was doing, then it was worth the fight. The next day, X met with Daniel again to talk about their next steps. "I'm not going to lie," Daniel said as they sat in a quiet cafe. This is going to be hard. It's going to take time, and we'll face setbacks. But if we keep pushing forward, we can create something incredible. X felt a sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't about getting everything perfect right away. It was about the process. It was about building, learning, and adjusting along the way. I'm all in, X said firmly, feeling a new sense of confidence. Let's do this. Over the next few months, the project began to take shape. It wasn't smooth sailing, of course. There were plenty of obstacles, moments of frustration, and times when it seemed like everything was falling apart. But through it all, X learned to embrace the challenges. He learned that the process of building something, whether it was a company, a community, or even a life, wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and often frustrating. But that was what made it worth doing. X also began to realize that the real success of the project wasn't going to be measured by how much money they made or how many accolades they received. It was going to be measured by the impact they had. It was going to be about the difference they made in the world, about the people whose lives they touched and changed. That was the kind of success he had been searching for all along. One evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, X sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city. He had come so far from the person he used to be, the person who was defined by his family's wealth and legacy. Now, he was building something from the ground up, creating something that was truly his own. And while the future was still uncertain, he finally felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't looking for approval from anyone else anymore. He wasn't trying to prove anything to his father or the business world. He was doing this for himself, and for the impact he hoped to make on the world. As he sat there, watching the sun set over the city, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was his journey now. It was messy, imperfect, and full of uncertainty. But it was his, and that was all that mattered. The project was growing, and so was the pressure. What had once seemed like a dream, a vision of creating something meaningful and impactful, was slowly becoming a tangible reality. But with that reality came the weight of expectations. Not just from the people around him, but from within himself. X had never been one to shy away from hard work. His entire life had been about proving his worth, about showing that he could succeed, no matter the cost. But now, with this new project, success wasn't defined by money, status, or power. It was defined by something much harder to quantify: impact. At first, it had felt simple. They had a clear mission: to create a sustainable solution that would address both environmental and social issues. It was a cause that resonated deeply with X, one that gave him a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. But as the project grew, so did the complications. They had started small, building a team of passionate individuals who shared their vision. But soon, the stakes became higher. Investors wanted to see results. The media wanted to hear about breakthroughs. Everyone wanted something, and they wanted it fast. X had always been able to manage the pressures of the corporate world, but this was different. This wasn't about meeting quarterly numbers or ticking boxes on a profit and loss statement. This was about creating something that would change the world, and the pressure was suffocating. As the weeks passed, the constant demands of the project began to wear on X. There were late nights at the office, endless meetings, and discussions that felt like they were leading nowhere. He had always been the kind of person who thrived under pressure, but now he was starting to question whether this was worth it. Was this truly the path he wanted to walk, or was he just substituting one form of success for another? One evening, as he sat in the office, staring at a pile of reports and financial projections, a message from his father flashed across his phone. It was a simple text, but it was enough to pull X from his thoughts. "You're making great progress. But remember, we both know that real power comes from controlling the system, not fighting against it. If you want to truly make a difference, you need to be a part of the game, not standing outside of it." X paused, his fingers hovering over the screen. His father's words echoed in his mind. He had been pushing against the traditional corporate world for so long, trying to build something different. But now, his father was suggesting that the only way to make a real impact was by joining the very system X had spent years distancing himself from. The idea was tempting. It was an easy out, an opportunity to go back to the familiar world of business deals, power, and wealth. It would solve all the problems they were facing in terms of funding and influence. But X knew, deep down, that it would be a betrayal of everything he had worked for. Still, the pressure was mounting. The team was counting on him, investors were demanding results, and everyone had their own idea of what success looked like. Was he willing to let go of the values that had driven him this far just to get what he wanted? The next morning, X called a meeting with Daniel. He needed to talk, to make sense of the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. "I got a message from my father last night," X said, leaning back in his chair. "He said that if I want to make a real impact, I need to get back into the system. Join the game. And part of me is tempted. It's the easy way out." Daniel looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you want? To go back to the old life? To play by the same rules that made you walk away in the first place?" X hesitated. "I don't know anymore. Everything's so chaotic. The pressure to deliver is overwhelming, and the system wants results now, not later. But if I take that route, I'm afraid I'll lose everything I've built." "You won't lose everything," Daniel said, his voice calm. "But you'll lose something important. Your integrity. Your vision. It's easy to get caught up in the system, X. It's comfortable. But if you go back to playing their game, you're giving up on the very thing that makes what we're doing special." X ran a hand through his hair. "I know. But I can't help feeling like I'm drowning. Everyone's telling me I need to act faster, move quicker, be more aggressive. And I don't want to let them down." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You have to make a choice. You can't have both. You can't keep trying to play their game and ours. You're not the same person you were before, and neither is this project. It's about values. It's about doing things differently. You need to decide if that's worth the fight." X sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had spent so much of his life chasing after success in the traditional sense, wealth, recognition, power. But now he had something more. He had a chance to build something that meant something. Something that would make a difference in the world. But that came with its own challenges. The road was harder. The stakes were higher. And sometimes, it felt like everyone was pulling him in a different direction, all of them offering quick fixes and easy answers. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was the true test. This was the moment where he had to decide who he was, what he stood for, and whether he would stay true to his vision, even if it meant going against the grain. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of temptation, and of pressure to conform. But X knew that this was the path he had chosen, the path of integrity, of building something that was meaningful and lasting. "I'm not going back," X said finally, his voice firm. "I can't. I've seen too much to just turn back now." Daniel smiled. "I knew you'd say that. Let's keep moving forward, then. Let's keep building something that actually matters." As X left the office that night, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready for it. He wasn't doing this for anyone else, not for the approval of his father, not for the praise of the world. He was doing this because it was the right thing to do. And as he looked out at the city, he knew that the real challenge wasn't the pressure from the outside world. The real challenge was staying true to himself. The noise was deafening. Every day, X was bombarded with messages, calls from investors, emails from potential partners, meetings with new team members, and countless reports that seemed to come from every direction. The pressure had escalated to a point where it felt like his every move was being scrutinized, and for a moment, he questioned whether he could really handle it. The project, though still in its early stages, was growing faster than he had ever anticipated. The ambition behind it was contagious, and the momentum was undeniable. But with that growth came an overwhelming sense of chaos. Everyone had their own ideas, their own expectations, and their own vision for the future. But none of it felt like his vision anymore. It was all starting to feel like a web of competing interests, each pulling him in different directions. Sitting at his desk one evening, X found himself staring at a list of to-dos that seemed to stretch into infinity. He had once prided himself on being able to juggle everything, but now it felt like the more he tried to manage, the less in control he became. The project was no longer just an idea, it was a business, a growing entity, and with that came an entirely new set of demands. It was then that X realized something crucial: he had lost focus. In trying to accommodate every person's expectations, he had allowed the project to stray from its core mission. He had forgotten the very thing that had driven him to start this journey in the first place, the desire to make a difference, to build something meaningful that would stand the test of time. He had been pulled away from that vision by the relentless distractions of the world around him. The constant calls for money, for investors, for validation, it had all become too much. His original purpose had been to create something that would change lives, not to please others or appease a system that didn't understand his vision. The realization hit him hard. If he wanted to stay true to his mission, he had to focus. He needed to shut out the noise, tune out the distractions, and return to the core of what he believed in. But that wasn't going to be easy. The next day, X decided to take a step back. He cancelled several meetings, delegated responsibilities to his team, and set aside time for himself to think. He found a quiet spot in his apartment, sat by the window, and began to reflect on everything that had led him here. "I have to simplify this," he muttered to himself, the weight of the realization settling in. "I have to get back to the basics." He took a deep breath and began to jot down his thoughts. The project had started with a simple mission: to make a meaningful impact on the world through sustainable solutions. Somewhere along the way, it had become more about growth for growth's sake, about winning the approval of others and proving that he could succeed. But now, he knew that the only way forward was to strip away the excess. He had to return to the mission, pure and simple. He had to block out all the noise that came with the external pressures and focus on what truly mattered. For the next few days, X immersed himself in the core of the project again. He revisited the initial plans, the values that had driven him, and the conversations he had had with Daniel. He reconnected with the people who had been there from the beginning, those who understood the heart of the mission. He made a commitment to stop being distracted by the external noise and to refocus on the original purpose. It wasn't easy. The demands on his time were constant, and every person he interacted with seemed to want something different. But X started to learn the art of saying no. He learned to protect his time and his energy, understanding that not every opportunity or request was worth his attention. He began to prioritize what truly aligned with his mission. One evening, after a particularly long day of filtering through emails and delegating tasks, X sat in his office and looked at the progress they had made. It wasn't perfect, and there were still many challenges ahead, but he could feel the difference. The project was starting to feel like his again. It was no longer a distraction, no longer something that was being pulled in every direction by outside forces. It was grounded once more. He picked up the phone and dialed Daniel. "Hey," X said when his friend picked up. "I think we're on the right track again. I've been spending some time refocusing, getting back to the core of what we're doing. It's going to take some work, but I think we can do this." Daniel's voice crackled with excitement. "That's great to hear. I knew you'd come back to it. The thing is, X, we've always known this was going to be a long game. It's about consistency and sticking to the vision." X smiled, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift off his shoulders. "Yeah, I think I lost sight of that for a while. But I'm ready to stick with it." As the conversation ended, X leaned back in his chair and let out a long, steadying breath. He realized that staying true to his mission wasn't just about focusing on the end result, it was about staying disciplined in the day-to-day. It was about saying no to the distractions, even when they came dressed as opportunities. It was about saying yes to what truly mattered. The next few weeks were a test. X put his newfound focus into action, blocking out the distractions and driving the project forward with renewed energy. He prioritized his team, making sure that everyone was aligned with the vision and mission. They were no longer running around chasing after everything that came their way, they were moving forward with intention, with purpose. The pressure was still there. The expectations were still high. But for the first time in a long while, X felt like he was in control. He wasn't trying to do everything. He was just doing what mattered, one step at a time. And as the project continued to grow, X knew that this was the key: focus. Focus on what mattered. Focus on the mission. Focus on staying true to the vision. Because without focus, all the noise would drown out what he had set out to do. And he wasn't about to let that happen. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon, while X was sitting in his office, going over the latest updates from his team. The last few weeks had been productive, he had managed to maintain his focus and bring a sense of clarity back to the project. But the call he received would challenge everything he had been working for. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Thomas, an investor who had been keeping an eye on the project from the very beginning. Thomas had been one of the early supporters, always eager to lend advice and resources. But now, the tone in his voice was different, it was more urgent, more persuasive. X, Thomas began, I've been following your progress closely, and I have to say, I'm impressed. But here's the thing, we both know the kind of world we're operating in. The one where results matter more than intentions. And I think you're at a crossroads here. X felt a knot form in his stomach. What are you getting at? Thomas continued, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. I've got a proposition for you. There's a company, a major player in the industry, that's interested in partnering with you. They have the resources to take this project to the next level, massive funding, global reach, everything you need. The catch? They have their own agenda. They want to see things done their way. X's pulse quickened. He'd heard of companies like this before, huge, influential, but at a cost. They promised the world but often demanded more than one was willing to give up. What's their agenda? X asked, trying to mask the wariness in his voice. They want control. They want to steer the project in a direction that aligns with their business interests. But trust me, X, the resources they bring to the table are unparalleled. You'll have everything you need, no more struggles, no more compromises. X sat back in his chair, his mind racing. On the surface, it was an easy choice. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to scale, to reach a wider audience, to make a bigger impact. But something inside him bristled. Control. It was always about control. And he knew what that meant, he would have to sacrifice the very thing that had made the project special in the first place, its integrity. You're telling me they want to dictate how we run things? X asked, his voice steady but firm. Not dictate, per se, Thomas said. But they'll want certain compromises. Their brand, their vision, it's going to influence the direction of the project. And you'll need to be okay with that. It's the price of success, X. X didn't answer immediately. His mind was swirling, torn between the possibility of limitless growth and the values he had fought so hard to protect. The truth was, he was exhausted. The pressure to succeed had been relentless, and part of him wanted to accept the offer, to take the easy route and secure the project's future with the backing of a powerful ally. The temptation was real. But another part of him, the part that had started this journey with a dream of creating something authentic, felt repulsed by the idea. This wasn't why he had started. This wasn't the kind of success he had envisioned. Success, to him, was about making a difference without selling out. It was about standing firm in his beliefs, even if it meant going against the tide. "I need some time to think about it," X said, his voice tight with resolve. "I'll get back to you." As the call ended, X sat in the silence of his office, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His thoughts were clouded. The offer was tempting. Who wouldn't want to secure their project's future with unlimited resources? But at what cost? What was the point of building something meaningful if it lost its soul in the process? That night, X went for a long walk, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. The streets were quiet, the city lights flickering as he moved through the familiar blocks. His thoughts kept returning to the same question: what was the price of success? He thought about the early days of the project, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the small but dedicated team that had rallied around his vision. They had built something from the ground up, fueled by passion and purpose. But now, with the pressure mounting and the stakes higher than ever, that vision was being tested. He thought of his team. They had put their trust in him, following his lead with the belief that they were creating something different. What would they think if he chose the easier path, if he compromised their integrity for the sake of progress? The next morning, X called Daniel. "I've been offered a deal," X said, his voice heavy. "A big one. They're offering all the resources we need to take the project to the next level. But there's a catch: they want control. They want to steer things in their direction, and I'm not sure if I can accept that." Daniel was silent for a moment. "You know what we've been building, X. It's not just about the end result. It's about the journey. If we compromise on what we believe in now, we'll lose everything we've worked for. It might be tempting, but you have to ask yourself, is the cost of success worth it?" X took a deep breath. It was exactly what he needed to hear. His decision became clearer with every passing second. "I'm not doing it," X said, his voice firm with conviction. "I didn't start this to sell out. If we have to struggle, if we have to build it piece by piece, then so be it. I'd rather do it the right way than lose myself in the process." Daniel chuckled. "I knew you'd come to that conclusion. We'll find another way. We always do." As X hung up the phone, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The test of integrity wasn't just about the decision itself, it was about staying true to what he believed in, even when the world around him seemed to be offering an easier way out. That afternoon, X called Thomas back and politely declined the offer. It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. It was a decision that reaffirmed his commitment to his vision, to the values that had driven him from the very beginning. And though the road ahead would still be filled with obstacles, X knew one thing for sure: as long as he stayed true to his beliefs, he would never lose his way. The knock on X's office door came at the worst possible time. He had just finished going over the budget projections with his financial team, his mind racing with the enormity of the decisions ahead. The pressure to keep everything together was mounting, and the weight of the project's future felt heavier with each passing day. Yet, when he looked up and saw who it was, a new wave of anxiety washed over him. It was Ethan, one of his most trusted team members. Ethan had been with the project almost since its inception, helping to shape the strategy and vision that had driven them to where they were now. He was loyal, dedicated, and had a sense of purpose that matched X's own. But now, standing in the doorway, there was a nervous energy about him. "Hey, X," Ethan said, his voice uncharacteristically tense. "Can we talk for a minute?" X immediately sensed something was wrong. "Of course. Come in. What's on your mind?" Ethan closed the door behind him and walked slowly toward the desk, his hands wringing together. "I've been offered a deal," he began, clearly struggling with the words. "A really good deal. From a competitor." X's stomach dropped. He had heard of rival companies circling, waiting for cracks to appear in their foundation, but he hadn't expected this. Ethan was a key player in the team. He was one of the ones who had believed in X's vision from the beginning. The thought of him leaving hit X harder than he expected. "A deal?" X asked, his voice tight. From who? An organization that's been in the industry for years, Ethan replied, his eyes avoiding X's. They've offered me a pretty substantial raise, a leadership position, and they're promising a lot more stability. They're moving fast, and they have the resources to back it up. It's tempting, X. The words hung heavy in the air. X felt a mix of frustration and disappointment rising inside him, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Ethan was a smart, capable individual. X understood why the offer was so tempting. The company was growing rapidly, and the pressures were immense. The promise of a more secure position in a well-established company could be hard to turn down. But the loyalty they had built, this team that X had cultivated, was fragile. Ethan wasn't just another employee, he was part of the core. They had fought together through long nights, setbacks, and moments of doubt. And now, the potential for betrayal was staring him in the face. I didn't know what to do, Ethan continued, looking up at X with a sense of vulnerability. I respect you, X. I believe in the mission. But this offer, it's hard to ignore. X paused for a moment, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had been through so much already, had resisted the temptation of easy success, rejected deals that would have sold out his vision. And now, the very thing he had fought for, the loyalty of his team, was being tested. Ethan, X began slowly, choosing his words carefully. I get it. I understand the offer is tempting. I've been in your shoes before, and I know how the pressure feels. But I also know what this project stands for. It's not just a job, it's a mission. We've built something here, something that's bigger than just money or security. I thought we were all in this together. Ethan looked down, guilt written across his face. I'm not saying I'm leaving yet, X. I'm trying to make the right decision. I want to be transparent with you about this. I value what we've built, but at the same time, I have to think about my future. X felt a wave of compassion for Ethan, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. He had always believed in the power of loyalty, of sticking together through thick and thin. But this was a business, and Ethan's decision could very well determine the future of the project. The team's strength was its unity, and if they started to fracture now, it could all unravel. I understand, X said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. But you have to know this, I built this company with the belief that we were all going to grow together. If you take that offer, it will change everything. It's not just about the money or the position, it's about what we stand for. If you're not with us in that, then we've already lost. Ethan stood still for a long moment, his mind clearly racing as he weighed the words. X could see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. He could understand it, in some way, but it didn't make it any easier. I don't want to lose you, Ethan, X continued, his voice softening. But I also need you to understand that this project isn't just about individual gain. It's about building something that lasts, something that makes a difference. And I need people who are going to stay committed to that, through the ups and downs. The silence in the room was palpable. It felt like the weight of the decision hung in the air, suffocating them both. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ethan spoke. You're right, he said quietly. I don't want to lose what we've built either. I've been thinking about it a lot. And I don't want to be the reason this project falls apart. I'm not going to take the offer. A sense of relief washed over X, though the pain of the conversation lingered. I appreciate that, Ethan. You're one of the reasons this project has come this far. I'm glad you're sticking with us. Ethan nodded, but there was a sense of uncertainty in his eyes. I just hope I made the right decision. There's still a lot of pressure. X smiled, trying to reassure him. We'll handle it, together. That's the point, right? We've been through tough times before, and we'll get through this one, too. As Ethan left the room, X sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The loyalty of his team had been tested, and in this instance, it had held. But X knew this wouldn't be the last time he would face such challenges. As the project grew, more and more individuals would be tempted to chase the easy road, to compromise their values for success. X's job wasn't just about running the company, it was about leading a team that was committed to the same ideals, the same vision. And that would require constant nurturing, constant reinforcement of the values they had built together. As he looked out the window, X realized that the true strength of his project wasn't in the technology, the investors, or the strategy, it was in the loyalty of the people who believed in it. And as long as they stayed united, there was no challenge they couldn't overcome. X stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out at the sprawling city beneath him. The night air was crisp, but it did little to ease the tension gnawing at him. The lights from the buildings flickered like distant stars, but they offered no comfort. For the first time in months, X felt a sense of disillusionment creeping over him. He had reached a point where every decision seemed like a potential misstep, every challenge felt insurmountable. Things had been going well, on the surface. The project was gaining traction, his team was more cohesive than ever, and the vision he had worked so hard to bring to life was beginning to take shape. But the pressure of success, the weight of his choices, and the burden of leading a growing company had started to take a toll on him. It had started with the constant barrage of meetings, calls, and deadlines. Each day felt like it was pulling him further away from the core purpose that had inspired him to start this journey. He was so caught up in the mechanics of running a company that he had begun to lose sight of the dream. The stress had built up slowly at first, but now, it felt overwhelming. He took a deep breath and let the cool night air fill his lungs. The silence felt deafening, almost like the world was pressing in around him. He had always been a visionary, a dreamer, but in recent weeks, those dreams felt like they were slipping through his fingers, like they weren't enough to keep the project alive. X had always prided himself on his ability to push through adversity, to stay focused even when things were tough. But now, he wondered if it was all worth it. The late nights, the constant strain on his personal life, the relationships that had started to fray at the edges, it was all beginning to feel like too much. What was he really doing? He had started this journey to make a difference, to create something that mattered. But now, every decision seemed to be about profit margins, investor expectations, and meeting deadlines. Was that really why he had built this? Had he lost sight of the bigger picture? The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. He turned to find Daniel standing there, a look of concern on his face. Daniel had been X's closest ally from the beginning, the one person who could always be counted on to ground him when things started to spiral. "You've been out here a while," Daniel said quietly. "You okay?" X didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the city below, his mind a tangled mess of doubts and insecurities. "I don't know, Daniel. I'm starting to wonder if all of this is worth it. The pressure, the expectations. I feel like I'm losing myself in it." Daniel remained silent for a moment, processing X's words. Then, he walked over to join him at the railing. "I get it," Daniel said softly. "But you can't lose sight of why you started this in the first place. You've always had a bigger vision. Don't let the noise drown that out." X shook his head, feeling the weight of his frustrations mounting. "I'm so caught up in trying to make this work that I can't see the forest for the trees anymore. It's like I'm just going through the motions, doing what I think is expected of me, but I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore." Daniel's voice was steady but firm. "You're fighting for more than just the company, X. You're fighting for a cause, for something that's going to change the world. I know it's hard right now, and I know it feels like everything is falling apart, but you have to remember why you started this. You're not doing this just for the paycheck or the investors. You're doing this for the people you believe in and for the difference you want to make." X looked at his friend, his eyes searching for something to hold on to. "But what if I'm not enough? What if I'm not the leader they need? I don't know if I can keep going like this." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're more than enough, X. You've been more than enough since day one. You've created something here that's bigger than any one person. And that's because it's about more than just you, it's about all of us, and it's about what we can achieve together. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. X swallowed hard, trying to push back the wave of emotion threatening to overtake him. He had been so focused on the weight of leadership that he had forgotten the strength of the team around him. They had all bought into his vision, they had all taken the leap of faith with him. And it wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone who had chosen to stand by his side. You're right, X said, his voice softening. I've been so caught up in everything that I forgot why I started this. I can't do it alone. I never could. Daniel nodded. Exactly. You don't have to. We're in this together, X. Always have been. X felt a sense of clarity wash over him. The doubt was still there, lingering in the background, but now it felt more manageable. He had lost sight of the big picture, but now, he remembered the core of his mission. It wasn't about the money or the prestige, it was about creating something that mattered, something that would leave a lasting impact on the world. And he wasn't alone in that fight. I'm going to need you, Daniel, X said, his voice steady now. And I'm going to need the team. But we can do this. We can still make it work. Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. I'm with you, X. Always. As they stood together on the balcony, X felt a renewed sense of purpose stir within him. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges would continue to come. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face them. He wasn't alone. And as long as they stayed united, there was no limit to what they could achieve. The days had blurred together. X could feel the weight of each one pressing down on him more than the last. His thoughts raced from one task to the next, but nothing seemed to give him any relief. The sense of urgency that had always fueled his ambition now felt like a crushing weight, constantly pulling him deeper into a place where the lines between work and personal life were no longer distinguishable. He'd made countless sacrifices for this company, for the people he believed in, but now he was beginning to wonder if it was all worth it. Was the vision he had fought for truly achievable? Or was he simply too far gone, too committed to the dream to see that it was slipping away? It had started with the pressure from investors. The numbers weren't where they needed to be, the deadlines weren't being met, and the pressure to deliver was more intense than ever. But that was just the beginning. The team's morale had begun to dip, too. People were working longer hours, sacrificing more time with their families, pushing themselves past the point of exhaustion, and the cracks were starting to show. X had always been the one to lead by example, to keep his head down and push through when things got tough. But as the months wore on, he began to feel like he was losing control, like the foundation he had built was beginning to crumble beneath him. There were whispers among the team, concerns that were being voiced behind closed doors. Some of his closest advisors had begun to question his leadership, unsure whether he was the one they should follow anymore. It wasn't just the stress that was getting to him, it was the doubt. He had always been a visionary, always confident that the path he was on was the right one. But now, the road ahead felt like an abyss, and every decision seemed like a step closer to the edge. It all came to a head one cold Friday afternoon, just as the team was preparing for a critical presentation to a group of potential investors. X had been awake for over 40 hours straight, fighting off the exhaustion that was creeping up on him. His body ached from the lack of sleep, and his mind felt like it was operating in a fog. But he couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The presentation was supposed to be the moment they turned everything around. This was the chance to secure the funding they needed to keep the company afloat. But as X sat at his desk, reviewing the slides one last time, something in him snapped. The pressure of the situation was too much. He felt trapped, overwhelmed, and for the first time in his career, he began to question whether he could pull this off. X. He looked up to see his assistant, Maria, standing in the doorway. Her expression was concerned, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the person she had always known. "You okay?" she asked softly, stepping into the room. "You've been working non-stop. Maybe you should take a break before the meeting. Just a few minutes." X ran a hand through his hair, the tension in his chest palpable. He opened his mouth to respond but found that the words wouldn't come. What could he say? That he didn't know how much longer he could keep going. That he wasn't sure if he was the right person to lead this anymore. He shook his head, his throat tightening. "I don't know, Maria. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Every decision feels like the wrong one, and the pressure is. I don't know how much more I can take." Maria stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "X, you've built something incredible. You've brought people together, created something that didn't exist before. That's not something you can just throw away." X's eyes welled up with frustration, the emotions he had been bottling up for months finally threatening to spill over. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I've led everyone down the wrong path? What if it's all too late?" Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a grounding presence in the midst of his chaos. "You can't do it alone, X. You've never been in this by yourself. You've built a team that believes in you. And we believe in you. You've been through worse, remember?" X nodded, though the weight in his chest remained. He could feel the truth of her words, but it didn't make the decision easier. He had always been the one others relied on, the one who had the answers. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was drowning in the questions. And no matter how much he wanted to rise above it all, he was afraid that it was already too late. "X, listen," Maria continued, her tone softer now. "You've always said that the greatest leaders are the ones who know when to ask for help. Maybe this is the time. We all need to step up together, not just you." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always been the one to carry the weight of the company on his shoulders. But Maria was right, he wasn't in this alone. He didn't have to carry it all by himself. X took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You're right. I've been so focused on the end goal that I've forgotten about the people who've been with me from the start." Maria smiled, her voice full of encouragement. "We're all in this together. You don't have to be perfect, X. You just need to keep going." The reminder was enough to give him the push he needed. The pressure didn't go away, but he knew that he wasn't alone in facing it. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about staying committed to the mission, even when the road got tough. As he stood up from his desk, he felt a new sense of determination. The breaking point was real. But it was also a turning point. He couldn't let fear and doubt dictate his next move. It was time to lean on the team, to trust in the people who had believed in him from the start. Together, they could make it through the storm. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind to X. Everything that had once felt impossible, now seemed within reach. The pressure hadn't disappeared, but something had shifted. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about making things right, taking back control, and restoring faith in the vision that had started it all. The first step was admitting the cracks, not just to himself, but to the people who had been by his side throughout this journey. X knew he couldn't expect his team to follow him blindly anymore. The foundation he had built was strong, but it needed to be reinforced with truth, transparency, and most of all, trust. At the next team meeting, X made the decision to be honest about everything. No more pretenses, no more hiding behind the persona of the fearless leader. He would show them the man behind the title, the man who had doubts, who had struggled, but who was determined to do right by them. The conference room was quiet when he entered. The usual hum of conversation was absent, replaced by a sense of tension that hung in the air. As he stood before the group, he felt a brief surge of nerves. But this wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about being real. "Thank you for being here," X began, his voice steady but raw. "I'm not here to give you a speech, and I'm not here to tell you everything's going to be okay. I've made mistakes. I've led us down paths I shouldn't have, and I've put you all under pressures that were unfair." He paused, looking around at the faces in front of him. His team. The people who had followed him, believed in him. There was no judgment in their eyes, only the quiet understanding that they were all in this together. I've been trying to carry everything on my own, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. But I can't do this alone. We need each other more than ever. I need each of you, and I need to trust you. And most importantly, I need you to trust me again. There was a long silence after X spoke, the weight of his words settling in. No one moved, no one spoke, but that was okay. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment for them all to digest what had been said. Slowly, one by one, each of them nodded. Maria, always the first to speak, broke the silence. We've all made mistakes. No one's perfect. But we're here because we believe in this, X. We believe in what we're building, and we believe in you. We'll make it through this together. You don't have to do this alone. Her words were simple, but they carried the power of years of trust. And in that moment, X realized that the only thing standing between him and success was the fear of failure. That fear, once so powerful, had been a chain around his neck. But now, with his team's support, that fear felt more like a challenge to rise above. The rest of the meeting was different. There was a renewed energy in the room. Everyone, from the highest-ranking executives to the junior staff, seemed to rally around the idea of redemption. There was no turning back from the mistakes of the past, but that didn't mean the future was written in stone. After the meeting, X pulled Daniel aside. The two of them had been through countless challenges together, but this felt like one of the most important moments yet. We have to make things right with the investors, X said, his voice determined. They need to see that we're serious about moving forward, that we're committed to our vision. Daniel agreed, but his expression was thoughtful. We've got to show them we're not just talking the talk, X. We need to prove it. They need to feel confident that we can execute, and that we can do it without making the same mistakes. X nodded. I know. But I think we can do it. We've got the right people, and we have the resources. All we need is the chance. The next few days were a flurry of activity. X and Daniel worked closely with the team to rework their strategy, refining their approach and streamlining the processes that had once been overcomplicated. They knew they had to prove their worth not only through their words but through their actions. It was about showing the investors, the staff, and themselves that they were capable of turning things around. The meeting with the investors was scheduled for the following week. X had spent countless hours preparing, fine-tuning the pitch, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. But as the day of the presentation arrived, he realized that perfection was not the goal. It wasn't about impressing the investors with flawless execution, it was about showing them that the company had heart, that the team was unified, and that they were willing to grow and learn from their mistakes. The room was filled with tension when X and his team walked in. The investors sat at the large table, their faces impassive, waiting for the pitch. But as X began speaking, something shifted. There was a quiet confidence in his voice, a steadiness that had been missing before. He didn't try to make excuses for the past. Instead, he focused on what was to come, emphasizing the steps they had taken to rebuild and improve. We've learned from our mistakes, X said, his voice firm. We've looked at every aspect of the company, and we've made the changes necessary to ensure that we're set up for success. This isn't just about the numbers, it's about the people, the vision, and the work we're doing to change the world. There was a pause as the investors processed his words. X held his breath, waiting for their response. And then, after what felt like an eternity, one of the investors spoke. I'm impressed, he said, his tone more positive than X had anticipated. You've shown real growth here. We can see that you've made the necessary changes. We're willing to give you another chance. A sense of relief washed over X, but it was tempered by the realization that this was just the beginning. They had won the investors' trust for now, but the road ahead would be long and uncertain. There would be more challenges, more doubts, and more difficult decisions. But as X left the meeting that day, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had taken the first step on the road to redemption. And with his team by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The months after the successful investor meeting passed by in a blur. X's company was on a trajectory it had never seen before. Numbers were improving, morale was at an all-time high, and the team was more united than ever. What had once seemed like an impossible task now felt achievable, thanks to the commitment of every individual involved. But for X, the pressure hadn't let up. The weight of responsibility, the pressure to constantly perform, to keep growing, these things had only increased. Though he had regained the trust of the investors, and the company was slowly but surely turning around, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something important. It was a Wednesday morning when X received the call that would change everything. He was at his desk, going over plans for the upcoming quarter, when his phone rang. It was Maria. She rarely called during the day unless it was urgent. X, she began, her voice serious, "I think you need to see this." The line went silent for a moment, and X could hear her take a deep breath before continuing. "We've just received an offer. A huge offer. From one of the largest competitors in the industry. They want to buy us out. And not just a small buyout, they're offering us enough money to retire today, without worrying about anything for the rest of our lives." X's heart skipped a beat. He had known that the industry was competitive, but this? This felt like a gut punch. "Let me guess," X said, trying to stay calm, "they've done their homework. They know how much pressure we're under. And now they're trying to buy us out before we get too big to ignore." Maria's voice softened. "Exactly. The offer is tempting, X. The money is unimaginable. It's everything we've worked for, and more. But, there's something I don't like about it. This could end everything we've fought for. All the sacrifices, all the setbacks. If we take it, the company becomes just another cog in the machine." X leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had imagined this day might come, when the company's value reached a certain point, when it became an attractive target. But he had always believed that he was the one steering the ship, not letting it be sold off to the highest bidder. Now, with this offer on the table, he had to decide what kind of leader he wanted to be. He thought back to all the late nights, the early mornings, the mistakes, and the triumphs. He thought about the team, about Maria, Daniel, the others, who had been there with him every step of the way. They had all invested so much into this vision, into building something that meant more than just money. It had been about creating a lasting impact, a company with a purpose beyond the balance sheet. But now, here he was, standing at a crossroads. Should he sell out, secure his future and that of his family, or should he continue to fight for what he believed in, even if the odds were stacked against him? The decision was never going to be easy. In fact, it might have been the hardest decision he'd ever made. As he sat in silence, thinking, his phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "X, I just wanted to say, no matter what happens today, I believe in you. We all believe in you." Those words, simple as they were, pierced through him. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the vision. About the people who had supported him, believed in him when everything seemed impossible. He had fought so hard to get here, and now, at the end of it all, he couldn't just let go. X stood up, pacing around his office. He looked out the window, watching the bustling city below. The skyline seemed so distant, so unreachable from where he stood. But then he reminded himself, he had built this. From the ground up. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. He called Maria back. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice steady. "We're not selling. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to make this company into something that's about more than just profit. We're going to show the world what's possible when you stay true to your vision." Maria didn't hesitate. "I knew you'd say that," she replied with a hint of pride in her voice. We're with you all the way. And just like that, X knew what he had to do. The future was uncertain, the road ahead would be tough, but he couldn't walk away from the dream now. He couldn't abandon the team, the people who had worked so hard to bring this company to life. They had come too far to give up now. The decision was made, but it was just the beginning. X called an emergency meeting with the board and the leadership team. When they gathered, the weight of the moment was palpable. They all knew the stakes. "I've decided," X said, standing in front of them, his voice firm. "We're not selling. We're going to keep pushing forward. We're going to take this company to the next level. But we're going to do it on our terms, not anyone else's." There was a moment of silence, followed by a collective sigh of relief. The team was with him. They had all believed in this journey, and now they were ready to see it through to the end. X knew there would be challenges ahead, there always were. But now, more than ever, he felt ready to face them. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about building something meaningful, something that would outlast any deal or financial success. And in that moment, X realized that the true measure of success wasn't about the money, it was about the impact he had on the people around him, and the legacy he left behind. He had made his choice. And it was one he could live with, no matter what the future held. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?